Chapter 29. On the upside, I hadn't eaten anything all day, and there was very little in my stomach. Still, Mike moved half the train car away to let me puke in peace. After regaining my composure, I moved up the car to join him. "Sorry about that. I'm still a bit new at this whole blowing people up thing," I said to the grinning teenager. Mike replied with a nonchalant wave. "Relax. It's no big deal. Let's hope you never get used to it. This is no way to live." Again, with the non-teenager level of advice. The train was pulling into the next stop, and at the moment, I couldn't be bothered as to where we were going. Tiffany had escaped. I had escaped. The fallen lost another hunter. I had every reason to be excited. Deep down, I knew that the carefree and casual existence I had previously enjoyed was gone, replaced by this high-stakes game of life or death. Only now, running off and escaping with Tiffany was not going to happen so easily. As the train jerked to a complete stop, I felt a surge of adrenaline shoot through me as I knew that any number of questionable sorts could be about to join us. Mike stood and walked to the other end of the train, just in case a Rambo-style hunter came in with an M60 over his shoulder and chewed the entire passenger car into Swiss cheese. I assumed he didn't want to get caught in the crossfire. In reality, only a handful of very normal-looking people came in and sat down, completely ignoring my existence. Fortunately, no one ventured to the back of the car where I left someone a happy present. Those gifts are better given anonymously. The bell rang, signaling the imminent closing of the doors. In a smooth and quick motion, Zoo walked through the doors and made brief eye contact with me before taking a seat across the aisle. Once the car started moving, I was tempted to speak with him, but his body language told me to keep my mouth shut and play it cool. The next stop approached a few minutes later, and Zoo stood and moved to the center aisle and stood directly in the entryway. Anyone getting on or off would have to maneuver around him. The door slid open, and one couple got off, followed by a few more getting on, all of them giving Zoo a bit of a glare. To my surprise, Zoo moved to the side as one older woman got on and moved right toward me. It took me a second to recognize Nella in her scarf and sunglasses. "Good afternoon. Mind if I join you?" she asked me with a bit of a grin. I slid over so she could sit beside me. "You wouldn't believe the day I've had." "No, I bet I wouldn't. You can tell me all about it later. Right now, we need to get out of this hot spot." As she sat beside me, she slid against my bloodied arm with the bullet hole, and I winced in pain. Her look of alarm was genuine. "Where are you hurt?" "Forget about it right now. It's just a scratch on my arm." I lied, not wanting to make a scene. I noticed that my fingers had gone numb and my arm was hanging limp. "Let's just get back to the safe house and we can fix it there." She just nodded and said nothing further. Zoo had retaken his defensive position in front of the doors. As the bell sounded again, Zoo raised his open hand, palm facing toward the door. He slowly shook his head at the young couple trying to board. They both had shopping bags, and at first looked indignantly back at Zoo, whose face was stone, slowly shaking back and forth. Then the young woman smirked and pulled out her cell and made a call. The doors slid closed and we moved away from the platform. "It's okay. We aren't going to be at the next stop anyway," Nella said to me, predicting my question and correctly measuring my anxiety. "They weren't hunters, I don't think. Just seekers or maybe informants. It's incredibly hard to get around the city without your movements being reported." She turned to Zoo and asked quietly, "Are we clean here?" Zoo looked around at the few other people mindlessly riding the train and nodded.
"I think so. The other cars will most likely have hunters on them. The next station will be messy."
"No worries," she said, pulling out her phone and flipping to the GPS map. "We have about 60 seconds till we need to pull the emergency stop. The train goes above ground soon, and that's where we will get off." She gestured to the red button in the box on the wall behind a pane of glass. Nella maintained focus on the moving arrow on her phone and casually extended her hand toward the button across the car. The glass snapped and the button popped as a red light flashed on either side of the doors. As the train screeched to a stop, the tunnel was replaced with the view of an old neighborhood and an otherwise beautiful day. Zoo reached out and pushed the button to release the doors, and Nella moved quickly out of the seat. I followed, but groaned as my muscles had tensed up. At least I wasn't nauseous anymore. We exited, and Mike stepped out for a second as well, his focus on the other cars. "I'll cover you, and slow them down. Just move quickly," he said. At that very moment, a maroon minivan pulled up to the cross street with a jolly large black woman grinning from behind the wheel. "You all need a lift?" she said with an inappropriate amount of laughter. "Thank you, Gladys, for being punctual," Nella said, getting in the passenger seat. Zoo and I piled into the back, and Gladys spun the tires and raced back the other direction before I could even get the door closed. Gladys took the long way back to the safe house. All I really wanted was to rest and to find Tiffany, but I knew I had to do a debriefing first. Daniel was ecstatic to see me walk through the safe house door, and Shadrach seemed to be mirroring his emotions with an appropriate amount of slobber. Also in the room were Marcus, Tony, and Lexi. "First things first," Nella announced. "Let's see about that arm." While driving back, I had filled her in on the basic details of the wound and how it happened. Everyone in the car was rapt with attention, listening to the details of our battle and how Tiffany killed so many of her former fallen comrades. I peeled off the shirt I was wearing, and the deep red dried blood was thickly caked on my arm, indicating that I had repeatedly reopened the wound. Zoo ran through the same investigation as before, asking me to move my fingers and basic arm movements. Fortunately, there was no bone or tendon damage, so he could fix it easily. Again, the warmth filled the wound, and in just a few seconds, my arm felt as good as new. I inspected the entry wound and could barely detect the scar. The exit wound was significantly more jagged. That's okay. Chicks dig scars. The questions were flying, and I decided to put everyone off until I got cleaned up. The shower ran with pink water coming off me as the bits of blood, and other things, collected in the drain. How the hell did I get into this mess, and where do I go now? Things had fallen apart so quickly, I just wanted to escape and fade away. I had never asked to be part of this group, and I owed them nothing. My stubborn resolve began to solidify as I dried off and got dressed. Time to cut ties and get away, start over. Hopefully I can figure out how to get Tiffany back into the picture as well, but this constant running for my life needed to end. I walked from the room, down the long hall, and a powerful smell hit me with the force of a small bus. My feet automatically broke into a run as I burst into the main room, greeted by the smiling face of Jack Richter holding a large bucket of fried chicken. "Hungry, buddy?" "I could open-mouth kiss you right now," I replied with full eye contact. Sometimes I get a bit overdramatic when I'm hungry. Jack's smile got cautious as he tried to gauge whether I might be serious. I took a piece of chicken from the bucket and gave him a wink. Might as well keep him on the edge for a while. Joining the others in the main area, the excited talk was a steady buzz, the chicken lifting the mood instantly for the entire team. Daniel was in the middle of a conversation with Nella when he noticed me coming over.
Vin, sit by me."
The kid was hopping up and down, and bits of chicken were flopping on the floor. Shadrach was perfectly positioned to lap up each piece microseconds after it touched the carpet. I worked my way across the circle of sofas and sat by the kid, the conversations automatically dying down. "All right, Daniel, I'm here. Where do you want me to start?"
"Wherever you want," he replied immediately. "Just get to the good stuff fast. How did you get shot? Did you get to shoot anyone? Did you curve bullets? What caliber was the bullet that got you? What happened to your friend Tiffany? Did she get restarted?"
There was a collective gasp in the circle at the forwardness of the boys' questions, especially the last one. It's probably a pretty boring story as far as you all are concerned, but I need to be quick here because Tiffany actually needs my help, and I can't leave her waiting for me. The look of concern from the room told me that they were still uncomfortable with her. "Let me explain about Tiffany," I said. "She was a seeker, and I was her assignment. She was instructed to bring me in for some reason rather than just have me restarted. As soon as she found out they went around her with the attack at the park with Daniel, Nella, and Shadrach, she dropped off the grid, trying to find me on her own. The Fallen now consider her as more of an enemy threat than us. She has no one right now. Everyone has turned their back on her, and I need to find her." The looks softened as they considered her situation. I continued. I personally saw her kill at least 5 fallen hunters. They want her dead, restarted. I'm not going to let that happen. A growl from my stomach told me to concentrate on the piece of chicken in my hand, also a good opportunity to let my decision to help Tiffany sink in. To my surprise, Nella spoke up first. What do you need us to do? We are happy to help. I must have stopped mid-chew because my brain needed more power to process what she had just said. I just managed a confused, huh? Nella smiled and added, Finn, if what you are saying is true, then Tiffany needs your help, and she may actually be willing to help us as well. Let's go get her and bring her here. It became a bit clear that Nella was being strategic. Tiffany held valuable information in this fight against the Fallen. Nella wanted her to defect. Well, let's go. The sooner we get to her, the better. She is in a great deal of danger.
And how can we be sure she isn't playing us for fools?
Gladys said, with drumstick in one hand and a bucket of chicken tucked protectively under the other arm. Considering that most of the bullets I stopped were aimed at her, I think it's safe to say they want her dead. I'm not even sure she survived this far. I was already standing and heading for the door. Zoo got up as well and followed.
Hang on, Daniel said loudly. I didn't get to hear all the details. How many bullets did you stop? Come on, Finn. Don't go already.
His face reflected the torture he was feeling, but I had no choice. I'm back before you know it, and hopefully I'll be bringing Tiffany with me. You're going to love her. I smiled as warmly as I could, and Daniel relented, plopping back down on the floor beside Shadrach. Outside, Zoo and I walked to the end of the block instead of taking one of the 2 cars in the garage. Are we going to just walk? I would recommend against public transportation, I said. I've had some bad experiences. Zoo shook his head.
No, we will get a ride soon, but we need to be more careful not to use same cars too much or they get tracked. The minivan that Gladys used got reported across network, so we need to use something else. Here we go.
He pointed to a shabby pickup with rust around the wheel wells and the back bumper held on with bungee cords.
We have several cars parked around the area to throw off scent of our group.
With a flick of his wrist, the door locks popped, although I'm pretty sure that there was nothing worth stealing in this wreck. He held his finger over the keyhole and in one quick motion turned the car on without a key. Now that's a good trick, I said. You need to teach me that later. Zoo smiled back with a hint of pride.
Indeed.
After 15 minutes of awkward silence, we pulled up to the street where the hot dog vendor had been stabbed just a few hours earlier. I motioned to the alley and Zoo pulled in. As far as I could tell, no one seemed abnormally alerted to our presence. My hands were shaking slightly with excitement, or fear, as I got out of the car. I had Zoo pull up to the fire escape and I climbed on the hood to reach the ladder. Stiffness and a tinge of pain in my arm reminded me that I had recently had a bullet go through me. A few floors up, I cupped my hands around my eyes to try to see into the room. Both chests were laid open, several guns on display, but no Tiffany. I moved to the other window, which had the micro kitchen and even smaller bathroom. As my eyes adjusted to the darkness of the room, I caught a movement out of the corner of my eye. The shaft of a full-size shotgun pointed up at me from the corner beneath the window.
Tiffany, it's me, Finn. Please don't shoot.
I've had quite enough of that today. Slowly, she moved into view, and I kept my hands up. It's okay, I said. Let me in. She was losing it. Tears were printed on her face from the running makeup, and her normally steady hands were shaking badly. If I didn't know any better, I would have guessed she was considering using that gun on herself. She just shook her head. Well, that doesn't work for me, Tiff. I tried to open the window and found it locked. Easy fix. I didn't even have to try. With Tiffany falling apart right in front of me, I used the power to flip the lock and the window automatically rose. I took a step toward her and she dropped the gun and collapsed into my arms. Easy now, I said. It's all going to be fine. We need to get back to our safe house. She shook her head.
There's no such thing. They will find us and all your friends. I never should have gone with you. If I had been brave, I would have just gone alone, and you would be free right now.
She shook her head and pushed me away. Sweet Jesus, I don't have the patience for this. Oh, shut up, I yelled. I don't have the fortitude for this bullshit drama right now. I snapped and I grabbed her hand while pulling her to the open window. This whole shitstorm is one big hot mess and we all just need to do the best we can. Let's go. The shock of my reply had the desired effect to cancel the whining and she followed me through the window. Deep down, I know that this is generally a bad idea with women. If they don't bleed out the drama slowly, it tends to come out in a big explosion later. But for right now, we needed to get to a safer location. Outside, we climbed down and found the car empty. Zoo was gone. Looks like I'm driving, I said as I slid behind the wheel and realized that I didn't have the key. Zoo had used the power to start the car. Shit. Time to learn on the fly, I said to myself. Mimicking his movements, I pressed my finger into the keyhole and focused on pushing up the tumblers. At some point, my intense focus shifted the world to a shade of blue again, and I could almost see the mechanism of the lock, the inner workings of each pin and tumbler. And then I turned the ignition and it started. How the hell? Tiffany said under her breath. Not really sure. That was the first time I ever tried to hotwire a car. Admittedly, I was grinning like a school kid. I backed the junker pickup out of the narrow alley and immediately saw Zoo standing on the sidewalk, arms crossed. In front of him were two young black men with sunglasses and leather coats, both looking quite frustrated but standing motionless 10 feet away. You ready to go? I asked him. Almost, he said to me without looking my way, his heavy stare on the two hunters. He said to them, I will be leaving now, and I am taking your toy with me. Oh, and if you don't mind, please hand over your phones. At that, their phones leapt out of their pockets and into Zoo's outstretched hand. They didn't even seem to fight it. Then he walked over to the driver's side and said, Out, I'm driving. And he handed me 2 pistols and 2 phones. Toys, got it. I scrambled around to the passenger side where Tiffany slid into the middle between us. I crammed their things into the glove box after shutting off the phones, and we slowly pulled out into traffic, the men still standing motionless in place. What did you do to them? Tiffany asked. Zoo held a tight smile and continued looking straight ahead and answered, Nothing really. I just melted their shoes to the cement and broke the buttons and zippers on their jeans. They could follow us, but they would draw a great deal of attention. He smiled, very pleased with himself. What's the plan now? I asked, curious that Zoo seemed to be content just to meander slowly through town. We will take the long way, stay off of main roads, blend in. They will be watching main roads for this car now that they have seen it. Tiffany was regaining her tough side and offered, That's why you should have restarted them. Kinda hard to relay our vehicle description and position with a bullet between your eyes. Zoo just shook his head. Linear thinking leads to predictable, linear result. Perhaps I want them to relay our car description. At that, Zoo pulled into a parking garage and went to the top floor. Parked by itself on the far side was a 1976 avocado green Mercury Montego. It looked to be in about as bad a shape as the pickup we were driving. There is our new ride. I quickly switched cars, but Tiffany went back to the glove box and retrieved one of the guns. Zoo shook his head. You won't need that. I don't know how to glue people to the sidewalk, so excuse me for wanting to be able to defend myself. Yep, the feisty Tiffany is back. She paused, reconsidering the situation. All right, I understand you don't trust me yet. I wouldn't let me bring it either if I were in your shoes. Zoo just laughed. Go ahead and bring it. You wouldn't be able to shoot me anyway. Just don't go shooting at anyone else unless absolutely necessary. Finn and I will take care of anything we encounter. My chest puffed up a little bit at the sound of Zoo including me in his praise, till he added, I will take care of bullets. Finn can take care of tennis balls. I was about to fire back at him when Tiffany interjected. You must not know about what Finn did down in the subway. I've never seen someone pull a bullet from the opposite direction. He saved my life.
Zoo considered this for a few seconds as he pulled back out into traffic. So you pull bullet directly to yourself to save girl. Impressive. How did you avoid pulling it directly into your own chest? I shifted in my seat and answered, Well, one of the hunters stepped in the way. He caught the bullet for me. In the face. Sounds like he did you favor. I just nodded, knowing that I was indeed lucky. Tiffany climbed in the back and Zoo drove casually, saying nothing. The big green land yacht that was the Mercury Montego got about 6 miles to the gallon with a tailwind, downhill. In actuality, it was the perfect escape car simply because it was visually repulsive. Some cars draw you in and force you to stare like the Dodge Challenger or Ford Mustang. The Montego had the opposite effect. You tended to instinctively look away. We stayed off the interstate because Zoo thought they were more heavily watched, mostly by police, of course. Plus, I doubted we could actually get up to speed in this antique. We should not have too much trouble staying out of their net if we just stuck to neighborhood. Downtown has lots of cameras, so we should avoid it if we can. Just relax. We'll be back soon. When do you make me wear the hood? Blindfold, perhaps? Tiffany asked, sounding defeated. I looked at Zoo for an answer, never having considered the importance of keeping the safe house location a secret. Zoo smirked and answered, Do not worry. We will erase your memories. Tiffany had a concerned look on her face and stared at me. He's kidding, right? Zoo had a smile on his face and shook his head. We do not erase memories. Just messing with you, he said. Finn says you can be trusted, so we will trust you. Tiffany looked back at me puzzled but smiling. I knew there was more to what Zoo was saying, but I didn't need to point that out. Everything would be revealed eventually. Plus, considering how long Tiffany had been doing this, she probably already knows what's coming. Whether she knows how tough Nella can be is yet to be seen. The neighborhood became surprisingly congested as we moved around the city through the residential areas. Up ahead, we could see the flashing lights of a squad car that had blocked the road and was diverting traffic. I looked back at Tiffany and for a second was surprised to see the back seat empty. Leaning over further, I found her curled up in the footwell behind me. My stomach tightened, sensing that this was probably a trap. Zoo looked concerned. Stay cool. This may be completely unrelated to us. His expression betrayed his calm. True coincidences are rare. As we slowly moved toward the intersection, where all the traffic was being routed, a smell of fire hit me and several fire trucks had parked farther ahead. There was an apartment building that had several scorched black windows. The fire had already been put out, and the firemen were re-rolling the hoses. After 10 minutes, the traffic broke up and we moved freely again. See, nothing to worry about. We are going to be fine. Tiffany had come back up to the seat and smiled weakly, still nervous that things could go bad at any second. The neighborhood started looking familiar as we approached the warehouse that served as our safe house. Do you know this area well? Zoo asked Tiffany. She hesitated for a second and then answered, I have been stationed in Philadelphia for over 40 years. I know most every corner of this town. Oh yeah, I keep forgetting she's an old lady. In the back of my mind, I was wrestling with the idea of her being so old and trying to figure out if that made her less hot. I decided it had no effect and wouldn't be slowing me down one iota, provided we somehow survived the next 24 hours, of course. As we pulled into the alley, I recognized the slim figure in the hoodie to be Lexi taking her turn on guard duty. The garage was pitch black as usual, and I grabbed Tiffany's hand and led her to the door. Fortunately, Zoo opened the door, so I didn't risk sending everyone inside back into shock by tripping the security bolts. Inside, Nella and Tony were talking in the kitchen. I did a quick sweep looking for Daniel and his beast, and to my surprise, they were both absent. They immediately stopped talking and looked our way. Nella sizing up the leather-clad Tiffany hanging on my arm. There were no attempts to make her feel welcome, which was not the least bit surprising considering Nella was in charge here, the least hospitable person I knew, well, except for Zoo, maybe. I was a bit relieved that Gladys was absent, the proverbial gasoline to Tiffany's match.
Zoo went ahead of us, and I heard him give an incredibly brief status update.
Went with Montego. 2 cell phones in glove that should be retrieved, as well as gun. She is armed as well,
he said with a head nod in Tiffany's direction. Nella just nodded and motioned to the couch next to the piano. For a few seconds, we all just looked at each other, the 2 women sizing each other up. Sure, on the surface, Nella was the seasoned veteran to look to have the advantage of experience on her side, but considering Tiffany had been doing this for the better part of a century, she was no spring chicken in tough situations. From the looks of it, I was the only nervous one, like I was bringing a girl home to meet my parents for the first time. Tony tapped on my shoulder and motioned for me to follow.
Time for a lesson. Let's get out of the way so they can talk.
Nella nodded in confirmation that I was not supposed to be part of these conversations. Thank God in heaven. I would rather have large caliber artillery fired at my head than sit between these 2 estrogen warriors. Good luck, I said with a wink to Tiffany, who gave me a smiling glare in return. Tony and I made our way to the dark corner and into one of the rooms beyond. This room had a large decorative fountain sitting inside a kiddie pool. He plugged in the power cord and the fountain made a gurgling sound before coming to life with several streams of water coming out all sides. I sure hope this is a meditation session because I could certainly use a nap, I said. Tony laughed, saying,
No napping in class. You won't want to anyway. This is pretty exciting. You need to learn to manipulate water. It is surprisingly different than working with something solid like a tennis ball. If you want to throw a ball of water at someone, you need to actually form and maintain the shape of the ball.
I remembered back to when Zoo had formed a ball of Shadrach slobber and launched it across the room. I just nodded so he would continue.
The easiest way I can explain the process is for you to imagine the water is flowing into an invisible form, like a glass. Control the outside of the structure and just let the inside flow freely. As long as you maintain the outside shape, the inside will be contained. Here, let me show you.
At that, he extended a hand toward the fountain. One of the streams redirected itself toward Tony and began filling an invisible shape suspended in the air. It looked to be a bowl till it filled over halfway, and I realized it was actually a sphere about the size of a basketball. The ball of water undulated slightly till it was completely full, and the stream from the fountain redirected back to its normal trajectory. Tony was concentrating intently, and the shape became so smooth that it looked to be made of glass. I reached out to touch it, and ripples formed on the surface, like I had touched the surface of a very still pond. Very cool, I said. How hard is it to control? Can you throw the ball? Tony smiled like I had just asked the magic question. He pushed both hands away from him, and the ball of water flew directly at my head. Instinctively, I covered my face, expecting to be annihilated with the biggest water balloon ever. When nothing hit me, I tentatively opened my eyes and saw that the ball was no longer a ball, but a ring, or donut, of water that circumvented my head. The ring then floated up and reformed into a ball directly above me.
This is a good defensive tactic that we practice here. We call it GAD, or Gravity Assist Defense. When you float something directly above an attacker with the intention of persuading them to run away, then the power will not fail you. Your intent is to stop someone from causing harm, and you are doing it in a way that is also not harming them. If they choose to not heed your warning, you just let go of the power. The ball of water comes crashing down on them.
I had a feeling this demonstration was about to get me incredibly wet, so I quickly sidestepped, making Tony laugh, and moved the ball again over my head, chasing me as I danced quickly around the fountain. It took about 3 seconds for this game to get old, and I decided it was time to give it a try, so I focused on the ball of water, now back over my head, and pushed it back toward Tony. The look on his face was priceless as his perfect ball suddenly lost shape and flattened out between us. With an undulating mass of water between us, I decided to spread the water out instead of holding it together. It was as though the ball of water exploded and covered the entire room with water. The unexpected jolt of water startled me as I spit out a mouthful. I looked over at Tony, who looked a bit pissed, so I just shrugged and said, "Guess I need a little bit of practice." He finally laughed and came over to me. To my surprise, he was completely dry. How did you manage to stay dry? I asked, wiping the extra water off my face.
Oh, I'm pretty good with water. I don't get wet unless I want to. I superheated the area around me so it all vaporized before it splashed me.
He paused a second and added,
You seem to be fairly adept at handling water as well, till you pushed it outward instead of holding it together. That surprised me, he said with a smirk.
Okay, now that I am soaked, I might as well dig into it. Mind if I try? Tony nodded and smiled, somehow knowing that this would be entertaining.
Be my guest.
I went over to one of the water spouts, and the stream broke apart and most of it fell to the ground. The little bit I was holding motionless in front of me was about as big as a marble. The rest of the stream wriggling like an epileptic snake before falling apart midair.
That's okay, Tony said reassuredly. You captured some. Let's focus on getting control of the stream so you can add to it. Remember, you aren't grabbing and pulling so much as you are guiding the water. Imagine there is a clear hose between the fountain and the sphere you are trying to build. Just guide the water as it flows.
The curved arc of the water smoothed out as it reformed into a stream and came right for me. I panicked a bit as it approached me much faster than I expected, and I jumped out of the way, sending the stream of water violently to the ground. Tony was smiling with his palm out, droplets of water dancing on an invisible shield around him. The drops rolled to the ground, and Tony remained completely dry. Wow, you need to show me how to do the shield. That was cool, I said. Tony smiled and replied,
The shield is actually easier than controlling the water. It's more just radiating out your energy and pushing it in all directions. And it will work with more than just water, but keep in mind that it is unfocused, so a single point of puncture like a bullet will still get through fairly easily.
So it's good in a pinch if you forget your umbrella, but not much else. He shook his head and laughed.
I wouldn't say that. You can use it as security detection as well. If a hunter pops your power shield with a bullet, you'll be able to feel it and then adapt before it hits you. Well, with practice anyway. We can work on shields later. For now, let's try to control a ball of water. Only this time, imagine the shell of the ball that you are trying to fill. You only need to hold the outside of the ball. If things are going too fast, just slow it down.
I kept forgetting that time could be slowed with the power. After a couple of deep breaths, I thought of Tiffany and how badly I wanted her not to be shot full of holes by Nella. That was my source, so I focused my will and slowly guided the water over to me. The first drops fell through my fingers, and I refocused on the shape I was trying to fill. Slowly, the ball of water began to take shape. It was only as big as a softball, but it was definitely a ball. I cut off the flow of water when it was fully formed, and I looked up at Tony. He applauded and said with a smile,
I can't believe you just did that. Nella said you would get it right away, but I didn't believe her. I usually don't try any of this for weeks. Normally we just try to move the streams of the fountain around on the first day. Well done, man. Let's step this up a bit. Want to play catch?
With a ball of water? Okay, you're the boss. How do we do that? The ball of water was still floating above my hands.
Think of the ball as having a shell that is solid. Push against the shell till it is moving in my direction. The whole time you need to hold the shape of the ball with the power. Go ahead and try it.
I floated the ball higher, and immediately it started to pancake out. Tony yelled something about focusing on the shape of the shell. Slowly the ball reformed, and I pushed it higher again. With a nod from Tony, standing about 10 feet away, I moved the ball in his direction. When the ball was right in front of him, he said,
I got it. Go ahead, let go.
I released the ball from my power, and Tony smiled.
Well done. You have pretty good range. It gets harder to hold the form the farther away the person is. Of course, a very small ball is easier and can be controlled much farther. Same rules of physics apply.
Wouldn't it be easier to just freeze it into a ball and then launch it?
Perhaps. That's a different technique that can be applied to many substances besides water. But water shows it the best. We can try a few heating and cooling tricks and then practice everything together.
Tony floated the ball of water in between us, and it started getting cloudy, and in a matter of just a few seconds, turned to a block of ice. He flipped it to me, and I caught it with both hands. It was a solid block of ice, perfectly smooth but cloudy.
If we used distilled water, then it would be clear. Not bad though, right?
I nodded and rolled the ball around in my hands. Using the power, I floated it back to Tony, who raised a hand in the direction of the ball, and the exterior of the ball turned wet and glistened for a moment. Everything was suddenly engulfed in a torrent of steam. 10 seconds later, the steam cleared and the ball was gone. Yeah, I need to learn that trick. Think of how much faster I can make ramen noodles. I can heat liquid already, but I can't get it to vaporize, and freezing a liquid is totally foreign to me. I can't even make something a little cold.
Yeah, there's a trick to that, Tony added with a smirk. First, let's tackle the boiling water problem. When you heated some water before, I bet you just added energy to the glass, am I right?
I nodded. Cup of coffee, actually. It heated no problem, but didn't vaporize.
Once you get stronger and more experienced, you'll probably be able to vaporize a cup of coffee all at once. But it's pretty hard, and it can be somewhat explosive, so I don't recommend it. Burns are hard to heal, by the way. Instead, make a plate layer of radiant energy just beneath the water and then pour through it. As the water passes through the superheated layer, it vaporizes. Remember the beer in your apartment? When I poured the beer out, it vaporized before it hit the floor. With all the steam, I couldn't see that it was all vaporizing at a single point. I replied, At some point it must be difficult to maintain the heat intensity of the layer. What flow rate can you vaporize? Well, that depends. If I'm very close or touching the water, I can vaporize about 6 gallons per minute flowing out of a hose. But the water needs to be passing right through my hands. If I'm a few feet away, I can do about 2-3 gallons. Across the room, I'm lucky to do maybe 1 gallon. These streams coming off the fountain, about 1 gallon per minute or less. Watch.
He reached a hand towards one of the arching streams, and at the pinnacle, it suddenly formed a point of steam.
Try it yourself on the other streams. Hold your hands on either side of the water stream to start out. Make sure that your radiant layer doesn't touch your hands, or you will certainly burn yourself.
I focused on my hands, flat on either side of the water stream. At first, the water didn't seem to change at all. Tony was sitting on the fountain rail, feeling the water after it passed through my hands. He kept nodding.
You're doing it. The water is definitely warmer. Right now, you're just heating the entire area between your hands. Try compressing that layer of concentrated heat into a tiny thickness. Then shrink the width of the layer. Imagine that you have a column of heat. Compress that column into a flat plate. Then, shrink the plate. That process is actually compressing the energy into a superheated spot focused on the stream of water.
Sure enough, as soon as I compressed the column, the water started steaming, but didn't totally vaporize. As I started compressing the size of the disk of energy, the water turned into a spray of steam. Tony clapped with excitement.
I can't believe you just did that.
Tony was standing now, smiling broadly.
That normally takes hours or even days of training. This is incredible.
Well, I'm kind of amazing. Humble too, let me tell you about it. Once the disk of energy was formed, it was fairly easy to maintain. After a full minute of vaporizing the water as it ran between my hands, I stepped back and instantly lost control of the disk. The water returned to its normal path back into the fountain.
Well, keep practicing. You'll get it soon enough. Remember, everything is harder when you are farther away. For now, let's try freezing the water,
Tony said as he pulled a ball of water from the stream.
The trick with freezing water is to actually pull energy out of the water. It's one of the few tricks with the power that the energy flows in the opposite direction. Usually you're pulling energy from the source of the power and applying it to the object. In this case, we need to pull the energy out of the water and it flows back to the source.
Hey, that's a good question. Where exactly is the source of the power? I asked. Don't I have to worry about sucking up too much energy and blowing myself up?
Nah, it don't work that way. We don't really know or understand the source of the power. Did Mac give you the dark matter speech? I nodded. Good, 'cause that shit's way beyond me. Anyway, wherever the source of the power is, it can absorb energy as well as send it. Your body is not actually absorbing anything. Don't worry, no one has blown themselves up to my knowledge. You are safe to suck up as much energy as you please. If you say so. This was all crazy anyway, so I'd given up trying to understand it. The next half hour was spent trying to figure out how to focus myself to absorb energy instead of push it. To his credit, Tony never got frustrated with my lack of progress. I wish I could say the same for myself. Damn it! This isn't even chilled. What the heck am I doing wrong? Wish I could tell you. Tony held up his hands, trying to calm me down. Most people struggle with the freezing part. Daniel's actually quite good at it, so you may be able to get some tips from him. I welcomed the opportunity to change the subject. Where is Daniel, anyway? This is the first time I've been here, and he's not. Tony got a bit quiet and uncomfortable. Well, Nella thought it might be safer if he was elsewhere when your friend arrived. You know, just in case. You mean in case she ends up double-crossing us all? Yeah, that's probably not a bad idea. She had already turned on me in the subway when things fell apart. I couldn't blame her, though. It was just a bad time. And her great legs made her pretty easy to forgive. I should go back and check on her, I finally said, to see if Nella has her crying yet. We walked to the door, and I knew there was a good chance it might be the other way around. As we approached the big room, I heard additional voices and a sound that had a vague resemblance to laughter, but that would be silly. Sure enough, Tiffany and Nella were laughing, along with Lexi, who had joined them. I assumed Zoo must be on guard duty. He probably begged to get out of here once the estrogen started flowing. I may be joining him soon. Nella looked up and saw us coming, and Tiffany turned to look as well. She was genuinely happy. Not what I expected. Back so soon? Tiffany asked. Just checking in that they haven't tied you up yet. Not yet, she said with a grin. Come on over. We were just discussing strategies for getting off the grid, an area where we will need to become experts. Agreed, I said, relieved that the kids were playing nicely and that we could focus on moving forward. The main door to the room opened and everyone turned to see Mike come in with Zoo right behind. His gaze immediately fell on Tiffany and then on me. Nella, he said with urgency, we need to have a word. His tone was serious, no formal niceties or teenager ramblings. Zoo looked equally grim, which I guess means nothing. That's his normal face. Nell got up and followed them to the other side of the room, so I took a seat with Lexi and Tiffany across from me. Looks like you all made friends, or was that just a show for my amusement? Don't flatter yourself, pretty boy, Lexi said with a wave of her hand. We all came to an understanding. You can relax. For now. Damn women, always plotting. That's why you can never let your guard down, especially when they outnumber you. Rule number 33, I think. Nella came over after a few minutes with Mike and Zoo right behind. She wasn't smiling. Things have been escalated and you two are being led into a trap. Her voice was flat and serious. What do you mean trap? I asked. The Fallen are trying to lure you out and make you exposed and vulnerable. The good news is that we are aware of their trap and we can work to avoid it. Agreed, I said, although I suddenly had a knot in my stomach. So what's the trap? Nella's face dropped even further as she looked down at her hands. I'm sorry to be the one to tell you this, Finn, but there has been an accident, and Mrs. Giovanni has been killed. My heart tore. The same feeling I had almost a year ago when a voice on the other end of the phone told me my mother had died. The shock overwhelmed my senses. Nella spoke, but I could hear no sounds. Tiffany grabbed my hand, but no touch registered. They must have noticed at some point, because Tiffany started shaking me to snap me out of it. Finn, are you okay? Are you still with us? I just nodded, my eyes dry, for now. A small spark caught fire deep inside me. It started to grow. Tell me what happened. My voice had an edge to it. Mike stepped forward and said, The fire at the apartment building. The one that you had to detour around? That was Mrs. Giovanni's.
And how do you know that it wasn't just an accident? She smoked for years, you know. Maybe she had a relapse and dropped a lit butt on the carpet.
I suppose that's possible, Mike said unconvincingly. But we also received a note.
He held up a piece of paper. It said, "Your move, piano man." Mike continued,
"Looks like you made some convincing enemies."
"Which one? Who's responsible?"
Mike shook his head. "It doesn't matter. Let it go. They all just follow orders anyway."
"Which one?" My voice elevated on its own, the fire inside me growing.
Nella spoke softly but firmly. "We don't know. This is a pure attempt to pull you into the open. They are actually announcing the trap, knowing that you will probably respond."
"And when I don't? What then?
Are they going to kill my sister? My nieces and nephews? My friends? Mama Joe?"
No one replied, so I kept going. "I need to engage them and show them decisively that I should not be fought. They will learn not to start a fight they cannot win."
"Slow down, Finn," Nella was pleading now. "You are not as powerful as you think. When you make a mistake in this game, it is fatal. This path only leads to one destination. You will be restarted, and anyone who goes down this path with you will be restarted as well."
At some point, I stood up, the anger taking over my judgment. "We all gotta go sometime, Nella." I strode over to the door, and when I turned back to them, Tiffany was right behind me, ready to walk out.
"You didn't think I would let you have all the fun, did you?" Tiffany asked with a smirk. "Plus, I think I owe you one."
"You know what you're getting into, don't you?"
"Hey, we all gotta go sometime."
Mike came up behind her and said,
"Finn, I'm going to give you some advice I gave an old friend many years ago who was in a similar situation. Go home. Walk away. Let this pass. They want you to react, so you need to avoid giving them a response. The fallen will move on. They always do."
I looked at Mike and saw a much older soul trapped in an awkward teenage body. There was an element of truth in his words, but not for me. "I just can't walk that path," I replied. "You're probably right. I guess we're about to find out." The door behind me opened and I spun to see Gladys come in with a blonde-headed boy behind her.
"Finn!" Daniel exclaimed. "I knew you'd be back."
He wrapped me up in a genuine hug around my waist.
"You aren't leaving, are you? I just got here. Hey, is this Tiffany?"
"Sorry, kid. We've got some things to do. Yes, this is Tiffany." Tiffany reached out to shake his hand and seemed to have hit a state of shock. She stammered and said,
You're the kid. The one they have been looking for. I've heard some impressive stories about you." "And now that you know another one of our secrets, I trust that it will go no further," Nella said forcefully.
Tiffany smiled and nodded. I held the door open and motioned for Tiffany to follow.
"And how do you plan on getting there?"
Nella asked. "Oh, I'm borrowing the Montego. Don't worry, I still have the keys." I held up my index finger and winked at Zoo.
"When are you coming back?"
Daniel asked, looking dejected. I looked at Nella, who slowly shook her head. "I'm not sure. Hopefully soon," I said, tussling his hair.
"Let's hope,"
Nella said in reply. The door closed, and we took our first step down the dark path. I mean, literally, this garage is so damn dark.